Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Trends in crime and criminal justice tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by Bill Gibbons, who's president of Memphis and Shelby County Crime Commission. Thanks for being here.
Glad to be here.
Van Turner is a county commissioner with the Shelby County Commission. Thanks for being here again.
Thank you.
Harold Collins is VP for Community Engagement with the Crime Commission. Thanks for being here again.
Thanks for having me.
Along with Bill Dries, senior reporter with the Memphis Daily News. We'll go through kind of a full range of things that are going on with the Crime Commission and trends and Operation Safe Community, which it tracks a whole lot of data. But I'll start right now with you, Bill Gibbons, and you are also, we should say, Executive Director of the Public Safety Institute at the U of M. And of
Thank
course,
you for that plug.
There we go, a plug, yeah.
Or University of Memphis.
University of Memphis, yeah. And then also former district attorney, and then what were you with the state? You were
Commissioner of the Tennessee Department of Safety and Homeland Security.
So I guess I would say this, we have a whole lot of data, and we'll walk through some data. We'll kind of talk through where violent crime rates are. And there was a kind of a spike in the murder rate, made a lot of news a couple of years ago, and has kind of come back down in the first quarter. When you look at the data, excuse me, and you track these issues, there's often, to me, it seems there's not a clear explanation of why that crime rate goes up or why it goes down. There's not that clear thing that people say, oh, it's the economy, or oh, it's a lack of police, or it's what is it in any given year that drives violent crime rates up or down?
Well, the answer is it's no one thing. I think there are a number of different factors. I do think that how we respond to crime rates in this community does have an impact. A good example of that, and this is kind of a historical look at it, but if you go back to 2006, it was a really bad year in this community in terms of violent crime. That really precipitated the first Operation Safe Community plan. But between 2006 and 2011, violent crime went down by about 25%. 2011 was our best year, at least in recent memory. But the interesting thing is during that time period, under Mayor Harrington, there was a real commitment to increase the number of police officers. And by 2011, we had almost 2,500 police officers. That was not the total answer, but I think that was a factor, along with data-driven deployment of those officers, which is also very, very important. Then between 2011 and 2016, we had a net loss of over 20% of those police officers. And as a result, there simply weren't as many resources to deploy in a data-driven way. Now, I'm not saying that's the only factor, but I think that's an example of a factor that we do have to consider in terms of looking at the crime rates. There are other factors as well, but I think that's one of them.
I'll turn to you, Harold Collins. You were also former city council from, let's see, what
2008 to 2015.
So in part, some of that time that Bill Gibbons just talked about. Do you look at, Mayor Strickland has made a priority of increasing the number of police officers. That's, he campaigned on it. You campaigned against him actually in that race. Is this number of police officers, do you see that being an effective means of getting the violent crime rate under control?
That's part of it. The other part is, as Bill mentioned, we almost had 2,500 around 2010, 2011. But we were able to use those officers in the community more. They were more active in getting out in the street, getting in the community, participating in a number of community events, which provided more of a presence to the community. Today, we don't have that luxury. So officers now are running from call to call to call to call. And so that puts them behind the 8 ball when they're not out there actively as they use their term, policing, meaning that they're visible in the community, going into neighborhood stores and those kinds of things. The other part to it is, I don't want to rehash what we're dealing with, but I'm a firm believer that people take jobs for benefits. security of their families. And losing 20% of your total deployment, perhaps, caused a lot of those officers to make other decisions.
And you're referencing the cuts and benefits that were done under the Wharton administration.
Exactly.
And while you were in the council, that at least the union, certainly the police union and other advocates for the police would say that was the driver of this huge fall off in the number of police.
Well, they might say that, but there are other variables that came into play. But I certainly believe that today's officers and what we have now do not have the opportunity to get out of their car and go and meet the community face to face. And that, to me, lends itself to reducing the crime rate because officers have relationships with the community.
Yeah. Van Turner, your take on this. The County Commission obviously doesn't have direct control over what's going on with the Memphis Police Department, but the County Commission is funding of Sheriff's Department and funding of the jails and so on. So your take on what works and what doesn't, and what you've seen that drives this rate that people are, I guess rightly so, fixated on.
Well, from the County Commission perspective, you're absolutely correct. We fund education, and we fund the jails, and we fund the Shelby County Sheriff's Office. So we see it from a sort of a global perspective. We know that it's all related. When we don't educate the child properly, the child may drop out, and when that child drops out, that child is more than likely to get involved in criminal activity. So we want to address the whole situation, and that's what we attempt to do from the County Commission. But because Memphis is part of Shelby County, we do realize that where we can be of assistance, we should be of assistance. And we have, I think, authorized a new class of Shelby County deputies. I want to congratulate Sheriff Bill Odom on doing so and making sure that their class has gone through, and he's done it expeditiously. And we want those officers, if at all possible, to shore up where there is need within these city limits. Again, we're all one county. When people are suffering and when there's crime and when bad things are happening in the city of Memphis, that affects the entire county. And so I think it is incumbent upon this commission to do what it can to shore up the Memphis Police Department in areas where there is need, and I'm a fan of doing so, and I will continue to be supportive of making sure that our deputies help out when and where it's necessary.
Bill Drees.
In that topic, Van, we already have Shelby County Sheriff's deputies as resource officers in Shelby County schools within the city of Memphis. Can sheriff's deputies fill some of what police officers had been able to do in community policing when the ranks were fuller on the Memphis Police Department?
I mean, that's probably a question for the Sheriff's Office, but from the County Commission, yes. I mean, we're 100% supportive of community engagement, community policing. When the individuals in communities know and trust and support the officers, it's easier to resolve crimes, it's easier to solve crimes and prevent crimes. You know, someone would say, hey, this is about to happen. Perhaps there should be more police presence at this corner or behind this building, or this is about to go down. And so that really helps. That helps prevent criminal activity, and I'm 100% supportive of the deputies being used in that way. There's already collaboration with narcotics, with gangs, and so there's already a great collaboration, I believe, between Memphis Police Department and the Shelby County Sheriff's Office, and doing so in that manner, I think would be very good for this community.
Bill, we're about to elect a new sheriff come August. Yep. What do you think about this idea of kind of more of a collaborative relationship between the two law enforcement agencies?
I think it's very important, and we have that now. And first of all, I want to thank Van and other members of the County Commission for their efforts to fund the Sheriff's Office. As he's mentioned, there's a new class for deputy sheriffs this year. A good example of what you're talking about, under the Operation Safe Community Plan, we call for an increase in law enforcement officers to the multi-agency gang unit. Beginning this year, I believe there were 36 officers in that unit. The goal is to increase that by 23 officers this year for a total of 59. Now, the interesting thing when you look at it in terms of where those additional officers come from, The Memphis Police Department hopes to devote an additional 8 officers, but the Sheriff's Office hopes to devote an additional 15 officers. And that's a result of the County Commission's action. So it's a great example of how the Sheriff's Office and the Police Department can come together to address a problem.
Mm-hmm. Harold, in your role with community engagement, how do you think the public views law enforcement in general? Is there a dividing line with city residents when they see a sheriff's deputy versus when they see a Memphis police officer?
No. We take surveys and collect data all the time, and we do those informally. And overwhelming support in the community from neighbors and neighborhood watch groups for our law enforcement. We don't really designate if it's MPD or the Sheriff's Department. We know that community neighbors want to see law enforcement in their community, in their neighborhoods, on their streets, whether it's the police department or the sheriff's deputies. They really don't care, and there is overwhelming support for both of these agencies.
Mm-hmm. So the ranks of the police department are increasing. I think we have the first net gain, according to the Strickland administration, in 6 or 7 years. Should the goal still be 2,500, 2,600 Memphis police officers?
Well, I think that's going to be something that the Crime Commission and the Public Safety Institute is going to look at and see. Does it really need to be 2,500 since we're reducing our, I guess, area of securing areas through de-annexation now? A lot of that plays a role in where we're going and where we're headed for law enforcement. But we don't know that answer until we get the report back from the PSI.
If I could add to that, there's pretty much a consensus that we need at least about 2,300 officers, and the Operation Safe Community Plan calls for that. But what's the optimal number? Is it really 2,300, 2,400, 2,500? What the plan calls for is a zero-based assessment of staffing needs within the police department and the sheriff's office as well, Van. The police department is undertaking that right now. They're in the process of a zero-based assessment of really how many officers they need, and we expect that assessment to be completed by sometime this fall. So that'll really tell us, is it really 2,300 or 2,400 or 2,500? Because that's kind of guesswork right now.
Van, the commission and certainly the city council have had some very spirited discussions about this very thing, about the right number of police officers. And I guess it's not just arriving at some formula for this, it's also the conditions under which more police officers and sheriff's deputies are in the community.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree with you. I think that, again, we have to support our officers, but we also have to support these communities. And when we can do both, I think you have a winning combination. And so we want to make sure that our officers who risk their lives to protect us, are compensated and have the benefits that they deserve. And so we're attempting to make sure that that happens. And I think when you have officers who are well compensated, who feel supported by the commission and by the community, I think you have officers who are willing to go and do what they have to do in the community, and I think the community responds better as well when you have these officers in that good state of mind and who are happy to be doing what they're doing, mm-hmm. and don't feel that if it's a chore or it's punishment or it's a bad deal. Yeah.
One thing on that, and about halfway through the show, one of the things I just personally learned most clearly when the Black Lives Matter movement became national was I had been very naive, that I didn't understand that for many, many African Americans in this country, to be pulled over by a police officer for a routine traffic check is a very stressful, if not frightening experience. Mm-hmm. And so how do you, and you and I have talked about that on this show, I believe, on other shows that you've been on, maybe in the campaign. I mean, there was a whole sort of realization for me, my naive, sort of white male existence, that was such a fearful thing. So how do you reconcile that concern of how people of color have, documented bad history with police officers or sheriffs or whatever, in general, I'm talking kind of in a general thing, with what you're talking about in terms of more police in neighborhoods in Memphis?
Well, I think, again, when it's when you first see that officer and that officer is pulling you over, I mean, there's a concern. But if that officer has been in the community, has introduced himself or herself to the community, and you know that officer is for the community, wants to assist the community and not hurt the community, I think you will have a better response. Of course, I've been pulled over. I know of others who've been pulled over, and it is stressful as an African American. Fortunately, I think that the leadership in both the Sheriff's Office and with the Memphis Police Department have done a good job with sensitivity training. As you know, and you know, thank God, knock on wood, we haven't really had any consistent bad incidences occurring here.
Some big high-profile incidents.
A few,
yeah.
But you don't see it on a consistent basis.
Is that, Harold, your thoughts on that, Harold? Because you were reconciling something that is different than what a lot of people you hear in a national debate about policing and the role of police in the African American and Latino community.
Well, you know, a few months ago, I was pulled over by a whole team of police officers. They mistook my car for a car that may have been in a robbery, and so they stopped me, pulled me over. You know, I mean, it was really. First thing I'm doing is keeping my hands visible. But I think one thing we have to do is understand the amount of stress that these officers are under each and every day. That's no excuse, but we have to understand that. And then recognize the stress that as an African American man, we're under every day. And so when it gets to the point of tipping over, that's when cooler heads need to prevail, and that's when dialogue among the leadership needs to come together and say, listen, these are some of the things that we're working on to try to alleviate this. We know mistakes happen, but in the mistake, let's not blow it up such that it becomes, as Van said, a major issue. Let's figure out how we can talk about it and resolve it.
I don't know what the stats are now. I remember some years ago the statistics were that over 50% of MPD was African American. I think, and let's assume is that.
I'm not sure. When the numbers were there, I do know this though, and I hear this a lot. Many of the neighbors would like to see African American police officers inside their community.
Yeah,
I get that a lot. Can we? We know they have to be here. How can we get more African Americans patrolling inside our community so that we can have some sort of relationship, considering what we're seeing across the country?
Well, let's shift gears a little bit because we're talking a lot about policing, and the more police you have, we're talking a lot about policing and arrests. Let's talk a little bit more about criminal justice and the criminal justice system. And to what extent, and I guess I want to focus maybe on recidivism, which is that in Shelby County, a third, I'm going to look to you, Bill Gibbons, a third, give or take, of people, I think the numbers are, who go into one of the Shelby County jails will be back in within 3 years. And that's a lot. That's a huge number. And that whole notion of, and again, we've talked about it before on the show, of once people touch the criminal justice system, there's almost glue about it, that there's some way in which they keep ending up back in the system. It's expensive. It gets them off any kind of life track in which they're in school or going to having a job and so on and so forth. What can be done to keep people out of jail in an environment which we're talking about putting more police officers on the street? How do you reconcile
Well, let me mention two things. Sure. But before that, I just want to stress what both Harold and Van have said, and that is the importance of developing relationships between law enforcement and citizens. And Harold focuses a lot on that every day through his role at the Crime Commission, increasing the number of neighborhood watch groups we have, increasing the number of productive Crime Stopper tips. District Attorney Wyrick's community prosecution effort is a great example of strengthening partnerships among prosecutors, law enforcement, and citizens. So increasing that and improving that relationship in many different ways is very, very important. On recidivism, you're right, it's about a third of individuals going back to incarceration within 3 years. But two things. First of all, a sizable percentage of that is made up of individuals who are not going back into incarceration because of committing another crime. They're going back to incarceration because of violating some condition of parole or probation.
Which
we
might
have,
be very minor by
and
I
we
think
have
most
a
people's
new
standards.
system in place now. It's been in place now for a little over a year to administratively handle those types of violations in ways different from reincarcerating somebody. And we're in the process of evaluating how that's going in Shelby County. We hope to be able to really make some determination on that in the next year, but it seems to be going very well. And it's kind of interesting, the recidivism rate is going down some this year, and it may be because we're succeeding in diverting a lot of these individuals who have simply violated conditions of probation and parole. We're diverting them into some kind of administrative sanction as opposed to reincarcerating them, which I think is important. The second thing is more job opportunities for ex-offenders. That's another area we're really focusing on. There are a number of very important efforts going on in the community right now to make sure that ex-offenders have the technical skills and the life skills they need to be good, productive workers. We had a symposium on this a couple of weeks ago. The key there is encouraging more employers in the Memphis area to consider hiring ex-offenders who have those skills needed to be good workers.
And how, it's such an interesting dynamic because as a country we villainize criminals, perhaps rightly. I mean, we put the local media in every city in the country puts this huge emphasis on it. Mug shots and last night's crime. If there's not a murder in Memphis, they're going to cover one from Des Moines or wherever. Then we turn around and say, okay, a couple years later, bring these people into your family business. Right. Bring these people, work side by side with them. Do we in putting so much emphasis on the fear and problems of crime, make it that much harder to bring these people out back into the community once they've served their time?
Absolutely, but I want to talk, you mentioned the glue. And the glue is the fees and the fines and the probation fees that these people have to pay. Because they take off work or they get fired because they have to go to court, so they have no job. Then they have to pay for housing, food, clothing, all these other things. And then on top of that, you pile hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially on fees and fines and probation fees. Now, going back to your question about asking the family business to take on, absolutely. When you vilify someone who has done something wrong, or maybe have not done something wrong, because you're innocent until proven guilty, but that mugshot on the arrest, or in some cases the perp walk, automatically makes you guilty. And so most families are going to say, hey, wait a minute, I've got to take a step back. How can you guarantee me this person is going to, one, come to work on time, be there when I need them, and then not do me wrong if I hire them? Yeah.
Your thoughts on this, on recidivism and bringing people back into the community and even keeping people out of the criminal justice system, in the jail and so on, in the first place?
Yeah, I think there's wonderful support around this issue nowadays. You have Ban the Box, which has been a movement and legislation. You have the whole notion of with driver's licenses being suspended. That's another issue. I mean, how can you get to work and you can't drive? So being able to, figure out ways the way they don't have to pay these huge fines in order to get their licenses back. I think there was just a symposium this past weekend where people were able to come and resolve any outstanding issues that they have as it relates to probation or fees that are owed. So I'm supportive of what Councilman Collins has indicated. We have to figure out a way to make sure that the financial burden that remains after a person has served their time does not, make them go right back into the system. So we have to figure this out. I think there are wonderful programs underway to help figure it out, but we just need to, focus on that as well.
And just a couple minutes left, and we may want to talk a little about statues here, just since we've got Van Turner.
Okay, all right. Let's talk about that. One of your other positions is as the head of Memphis Green Space, which is the owner of Health Science Park and Memphis Park, where Confederate monuments were removed last December. I know that some of this is in litigation, but what can you tell me about plans for the park and what's going to happen with what's left of the monuments?
As of course we're in litigation now, and the case has been appealed to the Court of Appeals in the Middle District. So while that's going forward, we need to make sure that we invite people we invite citizens out to the park, and we want them to enjoy themselves at the park. I think heretofore people perhaps have not utilized the park because of the Confederate statues, and now that they have been removed, we want to invite all citizens of Shelby County to come and enjoy the park. Right now we have yoga and Tai Chi. I haven't put on my tights and gone out there yet, but perhaps
we'll have a photographer.
Right. But yoga's a big
It's a
thing
big
in the
deal.
park.
Yeah, it's a big deal. And we want to do other things. Maybe a 5K run or two is in the process of being planned. I want to thank the MMDC, the Medical District Collaboration, and the Downtown Memphis Commission, and Ms. Carol Coletta with the Riverfront Group. They're doing great work to make sure we have adequate programming for the parks.
I've heard people ask this, I'm sure you get asked on an almost daily basis, the fencing and the pedestals themselves aren't exactly, the fencing alone is not very inviting, as a park. I can't imagine anyone would want that there as someone managing a park. When is that not going to move until the litigation is resolved, or are there other issues about those pedestals? Just a couple seconds.
No, we're trying to get that done,
okay.
and we're hopeful that can be done pretty soon.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you all for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. Join us again next week.